Evelyn's hand hovered over the donor card when Uncle Frank's laugh cut through the ballroom. The sound carried above the clink of champagne glasses and the low jazz drifting from the hotel's corner stage. Beneath the crystal chandeliers, Evelyn stood beside a display of scholarship applications, her silver hair pinned neatly above the collar of a midnight blue dress. At 64, she had learned that ridicule often arrived dressed as concern. Frank approached with a tumbler of bourbon in one hand, the amber liquid catching the warm light. His charcoal suit strained slightly at the buttons, and the sharp scent of his aftershave reached her before he did. $5,000, he said, glancing at the pledge card beneath her fingers. For students you've never met? Several relatives turned toward them. Evelyn's cousin lowered her wine glass. A waiter paused with a tray of crab cakes balanced at shoulder height. Frank smiled as though he had offered the room a harmless joke. Who do you think you're impressing? Evelyn uncapped the fountain pen she had carried for 20 years. Its lacquered barrel felt cool against her palm. She signed her name in one steady motion, then looked directly at him. The right people, she replied. The waiter moved again. Ice shifted inside Frank's glass. For one brief second, the grin stayed on his mouth after it had disappeared from his eyes. Then he chuckled and turned toward the family members gathered beside him. That sounds like Evelyn, he said. Always making a production out of being generous. She slid the completed card into the brass collection box. The paper whispered against the others. It isn't a production if no one is required to applaud. Frank's jaw tightened before he covered it with another sip. The fundraiser occupied the top floor of the Harrington Hotel in downtown Chicago, where floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the chandeliers against the dark glass. Beyond them, headlights streamed along Michigan Avenue 40 stories below. The room smelled of polished wood, citrus perfume, and roasted garlic from the buffet. Evelyn had been invited by the Brightwell Foundation after spending 6 months helping a neighborhood library develop a financial literacy program for women returning to the workforce. Frank had come because his construction company had purchased a corporate table. He had spent the evening collecting business cards, laughing too loudly at investors' jokes, and introducing himself to anyone wearing a gold sponsor pin. Evelyn had watched him cross the room 3 times to reach Malcolm Pierce, the foundation's chairman, only to be intercepted by other guests. Now Frank nodded toward the brass box. You know, he said, lowering his voice, real influence isn't bought with sentimental checks. It comes from knowing how the world works. He tapped one finger against his glass. The wedding band on his hand struck the crystal with a bright little click. Evelyn smoothed the edge of her pledge receipt. Then you should be comfortable letting me waste my money. I'm trying to keep you from embarrassing yourself. By supporting scholarships? By pretending you belong in rooms like this. The saxophone player reached a long, mellow note. Across the ballroom, a photographer's flash whitened the walls for an instant. Evelyn did not look away. Frank had spoken to her that way since she was young enough to mistake certainty for wisdom. At family dinners, he corrected her opinions before she finished them. When she left a secure bookkeeping position to open a tax service for working families, he called it a hobby. When she sold the business 27 years later, he told everyone she had been lucky. Every achievement became smaller once Frank placed it inside one of his explanations. Tonight, however, Evelyn was not sitting at his table. She was not waiting for him to approve the shape of her life. You purchased 10 seats, she said, glancing toward his half-empty corporate table. Perhaps you should return to the people you invited. Frank followed her gaze. 2 of his guests were checking their phones. Another had crossed the room to speak with a banker near the stage. His nostrils flared. Those people understand business. Then give them something worth discussing. She walked away before he could answer. The carpet softened the sound of her heels as she crossed toward the scholarship display. There, a young woman in a black server's jacket stood reading one of the student profiles while holding an empty tray against her hip. Her name tag read Marisol. When she noticed Evelyn, she stepped back quickly. I'm sorry, ma'am. I was just looking. You don't need to apologize for reading. Marisol glanced at the photograph of a nursing student raising 2 children. My mother went back to school at 52, she said. She worked nights while she finished. Evelyn picked up an application brochure and handed it to her. The paper was thick and cream-colored, embossed with the foundation seal. Then she already taught you what persistence looks like. Behind them, Frank's laughter rose again, louder than before. Marisol tucked the brochure carefully inside her jacket. Thank you. Keep it, Evelyn said. And take another for anyone who needs one. A man's voice spoke from her right. That is precisely why we invited you, Miss Carter. Malcolm Pierce stood beside the display, his gold sponsor pin gleaming against a navy tuxedo. Frank had spent half the evening trying to reach him. Malcolm extended his hand to Evelyn. The board reviewed your library program this morning. We would like you to present it at our leadership breakfast tomorrow. Evelyn felt the textured edge of the pledge receipt inside her palm. Across the room, Frank had gone silent. His bourbon remained suspended halfway to his mouth as Malcolm added, "Several of the people you should meet are already asking about you." Malcolm Pierce led Evelyn through the ballroom without slowing his pace. Their footsteps disappeared into the thick carpet while conversations softened behind them into a steady murmur of laughter, clinking glasses, and muted piano chords. The polished brass rail beneath Evelyn's fingertips felt cool as they paused beside the panoramic windows overlooking the glowing streets of Chicago. Malcolm accepted 2 glasses of sparkling water from a passing server, the chilled crystal leaving tiny beads of condensation against his cuff. He handed one to Evelyn. "Your library initiative wasn't impressive because it was generous," he said. "It was impressive because you built something that keeps working after you leave." Evelyn thanked him with a small nod. She did not rush to fill the silence with compliments or stories about herself. Malcolm seemed to notice. "Most people spend these evenings telling me what they've accomplished," he continued. "You spent yours introducing a server to a scholarship program." Across the ballroom, Uncle Frank finally reached a cluster of executives near the stage. Evelyn could see his broad gestures even from a distance, hear the occasional burst of his booming laugh rising above the music. Every handshake lingered a little too long. Every smile seemed carefully measured. He straightened his jacket each time someone with an expensive watch approached. Malcolm followed Evelyn's gaze for only a second before returning his attention to her. Recognition usually follows people who stop chasing it. She smiled politely. That has always seemed more efficient. A faint aroma of roasted coffee drifted from the dessert station as waiters replaced silver trays of pastries beneath warm display lights. The ballroom remained bright, elegant, almost theatrical, yet Evelyn felt more comfortable beside the quiet window than beneath the chandeliers. She had spent decades learning that influence often grew in conversations no one else noticed. Malcolm reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo and removed a cream-colored envelope embossed with the Brightwell Foundation seal. The heavy paper caught the light as he offered it to her. "Tomorrow morning, we're hosting a private leadership breakfast before the conference begins. About 20 guests. Foundation trustees, nonprofit directors, business owners, educators." Evelyn accepted the envelope carefully. The thick cardstock felt textured beneath her fingers. "I appreciate the invitation. I'm not inviting you to attend," Malcolm corrected gently. "I'm inviting you to speak." Before she could answer, Frank's voice echoed across the room. "Malcolm." Several heads turned. Frank crossed the ballroom with quick, confident strides, bourbon glass now empty. The sharp scent of oak whiskey lingered around him as he stopped beside them. Wearing the same polished smile he had shown every influential guest that evening. "I've been hoping to introduce myself properly." Malcolm shook his hand with professional courtesy. "Frank Donovan, isn't it?" Frank brightened immediately. "That's right. Donovan Commercial Builders. We've completed several developments throughout Illinois." Malcolm nodded once. "Congratulations." Frank laughed lightly, then glanced toward Evelyn. "My niece and I were just having a little debate earlier." He placed one hand casually into his pocket. "I told her successful people have to know the right crowd." Evelyn remained silent, watching the city lights shimmer through the glass behind Malcolm's shoulder. Malcolm looked from Frank to Evelyn without changing expression. "Interesting." Frank mistook the neutral tone for encouragement. "She's always had her head in community projects instead of networking." "Admirable, I suppose, but business is really about relationships." Malcolm took a slow sip of sparkling water. Tiny bubbles climbed the inside of the glass. "I agree," he said. Frank's grin widened. "Exactly." Malcolm lowered the glass. "The difference is that meaningful relationships usually begin after someone stops asking what another person can do for them." The words landed softly, yet Frank's smile stiffened. Around them, forks touched dessert plates, camera shutters clicked, and someone near the stage applauded the end of a jazz solo. No one else seemed aware that the conversation had shifted. Frank cleared his throat. Well, naturally there has to be mutual benefit. Malcolm turned toward Evelyn instead. Ms. Carter, would you mind arriving 30 minutes early tomorrow? Several trustees specifically requested time to meet you before breakfast begins. Frank blinked once. Trustees? Malcolm nodded. They've reviewed her work in detail. Evelyn slipped the invitation envelope into her handbag. She thanked Malcolm again, then excused herself toward the coat check. Frank remained standing beside the chairman for a moment before following several steps behind her. Outside the ballroom, the hallway felt noticeably quieter. Thick marble floors reflected the warm sconces mounted along the walls, and the faint scent of polished cedar drifted from the nearby executive lounge. Frank caught up with her near the elevators. You planned that, he said under his breath. Evelyn pressed the elevator button. A soft chime echoed behind the doors. Plan what? Making me look foolish. The stainless steel doors reflected both of them in distorted silver. Frank, she answered calmly. People decide what they see long before I have the chance to explain anything. The elevator arrived with another quiet chime. She stepped inside. Frank remained in the hallway, one hand gripping his empty glass. Just before the doors closed, he spoke again. Tomorrow changes nothing. Evelyn met his eyes as the gap narrowed. Tomorrow simply lets different people finish forming their own opinion. The door sealed shut. As the elevator descended, her phone vibrated softly inside her handbag. Malcolm had sent a single message containing the breakfast agenda and one final note. Every seat has been assigned except the one beside mine. That one is reserved for you. The conference dining room opened before sunrise with quiet precision. White linen covered every round table. Polished silver reflected the amber glow of wall sconces, and the rich aroma of fresh coffee drifted through the room as servers arranged warm pastries beneath glass covers. Evelyn arrived 25 minutes early carrying only a leather portfolio and the cream-colored invitation Malcolm had given her the night before. She paused just inside the doorway while a server adjusted the name cards around the head table. One card rested immediately beside Malcolm Pierce. It bore her name in crisp black lettering. She touched the edge of the heavy cardstock for only a moment before taking her seat. Across the room, another door swung open. Uncle Frank stepped inside wearing a tailored navy suit that looked newer than the one from the previous evening. His tie had been changed, his shoes freshly polished, and he carried himself with the determined stride of someone arriving exactly where he believed he belonged. The room was still filling, leaving only scattered conversations and the quiet scrape of chairs against hardwood flooring. Frank spotted Malcolm first, then noticed Evelyn already seated beside him. His pace slowed almost imperceptibly. A young event coordinator greeted him with a practiced smile. Good morning, Mr. Donovan. Your table is over here. She gestured toward the third row near the back of the room. Frank glanced at the head table again. There must be some mistake. The coordinator checked her tablet, its screen casting a pale blue glow across her hands. No mistake, sir. Seating was assigned by the foundation board. Frank forced a polite smile and accepted the place card she offered, though his fingers held it more tightly than necessary. He walked toward the rear tables, passing directly behind Evelyn. The scent of expensive cologne lingered briefly in the air. She acknowledged him with nothing more than a small nod before returning to the folder Malcolm had placed beside her plate. Frank continued walking without answering. Soft piano music faded as the breakfast officially began. Coffee cups settled onto saucers. Warm sunlight spread across the windows overlooking Lake Michigan, painting bright reflections across the crystal water pitchers. Malcolm welcomed the guests, thanked the sponsors, and introduced several nonprofit directors whose organizations had partnered with the foundation over the past decade. Frank applauded enthusiastically whenever major donors were mentioned, occasionally leaning toward neighboring executives to exchange comments. His laughter arrived a fraction louder than anyone else's. Evelyn listened instead of performing. She made notes in the margin of the agenda, asked brief questions when invited, and thanked each speaker with the same quiet courtesy she had shown everyone since arriving. Midway through breakfast, Malcolm stood again. Before our panel discussion, he said, I'd like to introduce someone whose work reminded our board why local leadership matters. He turned toward Evelyn. Ms. Carter, would you join me? The room responded with warm applause. Frank's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Butter glistened across the untouched croissant on his plate, while every face turned toward the front. Evelyn stood, buttoned her jacket, and walked to the podium without hurrying. The wood surface felt smooth beneath her fingertips. The microphone emitted a brief, soft hum before settling into silence. "Good morning," she began. Her voice carried naturally through the room without strain. "The strongest communities I've seen weren't built by the loudest people. They were built by neighbors who kept showing up after the cameras disappeared." She spoke for only 8 minutes. No dramatic claims. No exaggerated success stories. She described balancing budgets for struggling families, helping a public library convert an used office space into financial counseling rooms, and training volunteers so the program could continue long after she stepped away. As she spoke, photographs appeared on the projection screen behind her. Children studying after school. Retired accountants mentoring single parents. Shelves filled with donated textbooks. Every image showed ordinary people working together instead of anyone celebrating a single individual. The final slide contained no award, no logo, only a handwritten note from one woman who had opened her first savings account at 56 years old. The room remained completely still until Evelyn stepped back from the podium. Then applause filled the ballroom, longer than before. Malcolm shook her hand warmly. Several trustees immediately rose from their seats and approached the stage while breakfast plates remained untouched. Frank watched from the third row as people he had spent years trying to impress waited patiently for the opportunity to introduce themselves to the woman he had mocked less than 12 hours earlier. One by one, they handed Evelyn business cards, invited her to visit their organizations, and asked thoughtful questions about expanding the library program into other cities. Frank finally stood, smoothed the front of his jacket, and began weaving through the crowd toward the stage with practiced confidence. Before he could reach Evelyn, Malcolm quietly stepped between them. "Frank," he said pleasantly, "if you'd like to speak with Ms. Carter, you'll need to wait your turn. She already has a full schedule." This morning, the words were delivered without hostility, yet they stopped Frank where he stood. Around them, conversations continued naturally, no one raising a voice, no one pretending not to notice. Frank lowered his hand, glanced at the growing line forming beside Evelyn, and slowly stepped back. For the first time since entering the conference, he found himself standing alone while every influential person in the room had chosen someone else to meet first. At 9 the next morning, I stood beneath the green awning of First Federal Bank with Noelle's leather document case pressed against my ribs. A cold October wind dragged dry leaves along the sidewalk, their brittle edges scratching over the concrete, while the brass handle beneath my palm felt as icy as a kitchen knife. I had slept less than 3 hours. Upstairs, Romy had spent half the night measuring my bedroom walls and discussing paint colors with Wade, speaking loudly enough for me to hear through the heating vent. 2 weeks, they had said. 14 days to erase me. Inside the bank, warm air carrying the faint smell of coffee and carpet cleaner fogged my glasses. I wiped them with Noelle's handkerchief and joined the short line beneath the fluorescent lights. Every movement seemed unnaturally loud. The stamp of a teller's seal, the soft whir of the cash counter, the clicking heels of a woman crossing the marble floor. When my turn came, I placed the case on the counter. "I need to know exactly what remains in my name," I told the teller. She looked at my driver's license, then at the stack of yellowed statements and property records. "Mrs. Bennett, this may require one of our account managers." She disappeared behind a frosted glass partition. I waited with both hands resting on the case, tracing the cracked seam Noelle had repaired with brown thread 20 years earlier. 5 minutes later, a silver-haired man in a navy suit approached and introduced himself as Charles Whitmore. The moment he read Noelle's name, his expression changed. He closed the office door behind us, muting the lobby to a distant hum, and lowered the blinds until only narrow bars of pale sunlight crossed his desk. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, "I handled several private arrangements for your husband." I slid the documents toward him. "My son says the house belonged only to Noelle and now belongs to him." Charles did not touch the papers. He removed his glasses, folded them carefully, and placed them beside his keyboard. "Did your son show you a deed?" "No." "A probate order?" "No." The vent above us exhaled warm air that smelled faintly of dust. Charles turned to his computer, typed for nearly a minute, then stopped. His fingers remained suspended over the keys. The house is not in your son's name. Outside the office, a telephone rang twice before someone answered. I watched a stripe of sunlight tremble across Charles's cuff as a branch moved beyond the window. Whose name is it in? He rotated the monitor toward me. There, beneath the property address where Noelle and I had lived for 32 years, were two words: Myrtle Bennett. Not Noelle. Not Wade. Mine. The deed was transferred 11 years ago, Charles said. Your husband retained a lifetime financial interest, but you have held sole title since the transfer was recorded. My fingertips settled against the edge of the desk. The wood was smooth and cool, polished until the overhead lights floated across it like white coins. Why didn't I know? Mr. Bennett said you trusted too easily. He wanted the property protected without burdening you with family conflict. Charles opened a locked drawer and removed a thick cream envelope sealed with dark blue wax. Noelle's initials had been pressed into the center. My breath caught at the familiar slant of the handwriting across the front. For Myrtle, when someone tries to make her believe she has nothing. Charles said it between us, but kept one hand over it. There is more. The house is only one asset connected to a private account established in your name. No withdrawal has ever been made from it. How much? He studied the screen again. The keyboard clicked softly beneath his hands. Enough that you do not need to sell your home, enter a senior community, or depend on Wade for a single dollar. The clock on the wall ticked through 3 measured seconds. I did not ask for the total. Not yet. Instead, I opened my purse and removed the folded note Romy had placed beside my breakfast plate. Packing schedule. Master bedroom, Friday. Movers, next Thursday. The paper still carried the sharp floral scent of her perfume. I laid it beside Noelle's envelope. Can my son borrow against the house? No. Can he list it for sale? Not legally. Can anyone enter my accounts without my authorization? Charles's mouth tightened. Not after today. I reached for the pen chained to his desk. The metal links scraped across the wood as I signed the security forms, revoked every outdated authorization, added a verbal password, and requested certified copies of the deed. This was not another discovery to sit quietly with. Each signature closed a door Romy believed was already open. When Charles asked whether I wanted the bank to contact Wade, I shook my head. Let him continue making plans. The printer warmed the room with the smell of hot paper. Charles placed the copies into Noelle's case, then pushed the sealed letter toward me. I slipped it inside without breaking the wax. Some words deserved to be read in the house where they had been written. Before I left, I turned back with my hand on the brass knob. Mr. Whitmore, if someone attempts to use that property as collateral, call me before you call anyone else. He nodded. Of course. My phone vibrated as I stepped outside. Romy's name glowed on the screen beneath a message. The realtor will be there at 4. Make yourself presentable and stay out of the way. Wind lifted the hem of my black coat, carrying the smell of rain from the dark clouds gathering over downtown. I read her message once, placed the phone back in my purse, and tightened my grip on the case. Then I called the number printed at the bottom of the deed and canceled the showing myself. Edit by 3:45. The first drops of rain were tapping against the kitchen windows, soft at first, then harder, like fingernails testing the glass. I stood at the counter with Noelle's leather case beside me and poured 2 cups of coffee, though I knew Romy would not drink hers once she understood why I had made it. The kitchen smelled of dark roast and the cinnamon candle Noelle used to light on cold afternoons. Its flame bent whenever the furnace clicked on, sending dry heat across the tile and stirring the edge of the certified deed lying beneath my hand. At 4 precisely, tires hissed over the wet driveway. Romy entered through the front door without knocking, followed by Wade and a woman in a camel-colored coat carrying a tablet and a laser measuring device. Myrtle, Romy called, shaking rain from her umbrella onto the oak floor. I told you to stay upstairs. Her heels struck the hallway boards in quick, hard beats. Wade came behind her, avoiding the framed photographs on the wall as if they might speak. The realtor offered me a professional smile. Mrs. Bennett, I'm Denise Carter. Your daughter-in-law said the family is preparing the property for an expedited sale. I set the coffee pot down. The glass base touched the counter with a quiet click. There will be no sale. Romy stopped beneath the brass pendant light. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of her cream trench coat, and the sharp scent of her perfume reached me before she did. We discussed this, she said. No, you announced it. Wade rubbed both palms over his jeans. Mom, don't make this difficult. Denise drove 40 minutes. Then she deserves the truth before she wastes another minute. I lifted the certified copy from the counter and handed it to Denise. The paper made a dry whisper beneath the hum of the refrigerator. Her eyes moved from the county seal to my name, then back again. She read the first page twice. Romy stepped forward and tried to take it, but Denise pulled it closer to her chest. This identifies Mrs. Bennett as the sole title holder, she said. Wade looked at me then. His face seemed washed pale beneath the yellow kitchen light. That can't be right. Dad owned this house. Your father protected it, I said. There is a difference. Romy laughed once, too loudly. The sound struck the cabinets and fell flat. Some old paperwork doesn't change what Noelle intended. I opened the document case and removed the cancellation confirmation I had printed at the bank. The showing has been withdrawn. No photographs will be taken. No measurements will be recorded. And no listing agreement will be signed. Denise turned off the laser device in her hand. The faint red dot vanished from the pantry door. I'll leave you to resolve this privately. Romy blocked the hallway. You're already here. At least look around. Denise's expression tightened. I cannot market property without authorization from its legal owner. She handed the deed back to me, collected her umbrella, and stepped outside. Cold air and the smell of wet pavement swept through the doorway before it closed behind her. For several seconds, only the rain spoke. Wade stared at the floor where droplets from Romy's umbrella had gathered between the boards. Romy removed her coat slowly and draped it over Noelle's chair. Fine, she said. You embarrassed us. Enjoy your little victory. I crossed the room, lifted her coat from the chair, and placed it over her arm. The wool felt damp and coarse beneath my fingers. Do not put your things there. Her mouth tightened. You think a deed means you can treat us like strangers? You gave me 14 days to leave my own home 1 week after I'd buried my husband. Wade flinched at the words, but I kept my eyes on Romy. You brought a realtor into my house without permission. You measured my bedroom before I had packed Noelle's reading glasses. Strangers asked before entering. You did not. Romy dropped her coat onto the kitchen table. A silver button struck the wood. And what exactly are you going to do? Throw your own son into the rain. I looked toward Wade. His shoulders had rounded beneath his jacket, and one shoelace had come loose, trailing against the damp floor. For years, I had rushed to repair every small disorder in his life. I did not bend down. You and Romy will remove your belongings from the guest room tonight. His head snapped up. Mom, we live here. You moved in 6 months ago while your kitchen was being remodeled. The work was finished in August. Romy's fingers closed around the table edge. Our house is being prepared for renters. Cancel them. We already signed a lease. Then find another arrangement. The furnace shut off, leaving the room suddenly cool. Rain drummed over the gutters, and somewhere upstairs a closet door shifted in the draft. Wade took 1 step toward me. You can't expect us to leave tonight. I expect you to pack what belongs to you and return your keys before noon tomorrow. Romy's eyes narrowed. Or what? I slid my phone from my pocket and placed it beside the deed. The screen displayed the locksmith's appointment confirmation for 12:30. Or the locks change with your belongings still inside, and you arrange collection through an attorney. Wade whispered my name, but I turned the coffee cups upside down in the sink. Brown liquid circled the drain, carrying the cinnamon scent away with it. Behind me, Romy snatched her coat from the table. You'll regret choosing a house over your family. I faced her across the room Noelle and I had paid for, repaired, and filled with 32 years of ordinary mornings. No, I said. I regret mistaking obedience for family. Wade's phone began vibrating against his palm. He looked at Romy, waiting for her to speak for both of them. This time, I did not wait with him. I walked to the front door, opened it to the cold rain, and held out my hand. Your keys. Now. The front door remained open as rain drifted across the porch in fine silver sheets, carrying the smell of wet cedar and cold earth into the hallway. My outstretched hand never wavered. Wade looked from my face to the brass keyring resting in his palm, then toward Romy, who stood rigid beside the staircase with water still glistening along the edge of her boots. The grandfather clock in the living room counted each second with slow, deliberate clicks. Finally, Wade stepped forward. The keys landed softly against my hand, their familiar weight settling into my palm with a metallic chime that echoed through the quiet house. Romy caught his wrist. "What are you doing?" she snapped. Her voice rose above the rain, striking the gutters. "She's bluffing." Wade gently pulled free. "I don't think she is." His words hung in the cool air. I closed my fingers around the keys and slipped them into my sweater pocket without looking away from either of them. "You have until noon tomorrow to remove everything." "That belongs to you," I said. "Anything left behind will be boxed and stored for 30 days. Romy let out a sharp laugh that sounded brittle against the hardwood floors. "Listen to yourself. You're talking like a landlord." "Today," I answered quietly, "I finally am." She grabbed her purse from the console table with enough force to send the bowl of house keys rattling across the polished wood. "Fine. If this is how you want to treat your own family, don't expect us to come back." She marched through the doorway into the rain, her heels splashing through shallow puddles on the driveway before disappearing behind the SUV. Wade remained inside. The silence between us felt heavier than the soaked autumn air drifting through the open door. He looked older than he had the week before at Noelle's funeral. His tie had loosened, and a damp lock of hair rested against his forehead. "Mom," he said at last, barely above a whisper. "I should have stopped her." I reached over and closed the front door. The latch clicked into place, shutting out the rain until only its muffled rhythm remained beyond the walls. "You should have stopped yourself." His shoulders lowered. Neither of us spoke again. He picked up a cardboard box from the hallway closet, climbed the stairs, and the sound of drawers opening and closing carried through the house one measured thump at a time. I walked into the kitchen instead. The coffee had gone cold. A thin gray light filtered through the windows, reflecting off the untouched second mug I had poured earlier. I emptied both cups into the sink, rinsed them beneath warm running water, and dried Noelle's favorite mug with the same blue towel he always reached for. Upstairs, footsteps crossed the hallway. Closet doors slid open. Suitcases rolled over hardwood. They were leaving because they had to, not because they wanted to, and that difference mattered more than any argument. By 10 that evening, stacked plastic bins lined the foyer beside 3 large suitcases. Romy came downstairs without looking at me. Her perfume lingered behind her, mixing awkwardly with the scent of cardboard, damp coats, and lemon furniture polish. She stopped only long enough to remove a framed wedding photograph from the bookshelf. I stepped forward before she could slide it into a box. "That stays. It's our wedding picture. It is a photograph taken in my living room, in the house your father-in-law restored with his own hands. I paid for the frame. Leave it." Her jaw tightened, but she set it back exactly where it had been. It was the first time since I had known her that she obeyed without another word. Near midnight, the moving truck pulled away beneath glowing taillights that blurred through the mist. Wade climbed into the passenger seat after one final glance toward the porch. He lifted a hand halfway, uncertain whether he was waving goodbye or asking permission to stay. I did neither. The truck disappeared beyond the maple trees, its engine fading until only the wind remained. I locked the front door. The deadbolt turned with a solid, familiar click. The house settled into a silence I had not heard in months. The furnace hummed softly. Rain tapped against the windows. Somewhere upstairs, an old floorboard creaked as the heat expanded the wood, the same comforting sound Noelle used to smile at every winter. The next morning arrived bright and unexpectedly clear. Sunlight spilled across the dining room table, warming the polished mahogany where 3 unopened envelopes waited beside Noelle's leather document case. One was from the locksmith confirming the new locks had been installed before sunrise. Another contained updated insurance records listing me as the sole resident. The third envelope had no return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Wait, the paper inside carried only one sentence. "Mom, I never imagined it would end like this." I folded the note once and placed it back inside the envelope. Then I opened Noelle's sealed letter for the first time. The wax cracked beneath my thumb with a quiet snap, and the scent of old paper drifted upward, carrying traces of cedar from the desk where he must have written it. Before I could read more than the first line, my phone vibrated across the table. The screen lit with Romy's name, followed by a single message. "We need to talk today. Alone." Edit the message remained on my phone while the morning sunlight stretched across the dining room floor, turning the polished oak into long bands of gold. I read it once, set the phone beside Noelle's letter, and unfolded the first page completely. The paper had yellowed at the edges, carrying the faint scent of cedar and old ink from the desk where he had spent so many quiet evenings. His handwriting flowed across the page with the same steady confidence I had watched for more than 3 decades. He did not speak about money first. He wrote about home. He wrote that a house was never measured by its market value, but by the people who were protected inside its walls. The final sentence on the first page stopped my hand. If anyone ever asks you to leave this home, remember that I already chose who belongs here. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into its envelope before reading another line. Some words deserve to remain close a little longer. At exactly 11, I drove to the small botanical garden where Romy had asked to meet. Autumn sunlight filtered through tall maple branches, scattering moving patches of light across the brick walkway, while a cool breeze carried the scent of damp leaves and fresh mulch. Children laughed somewhere near the fountain, their voices blending with the steady splash of water against stone. Romy was already waiting on a bench beneath a white gazebo. She wore oversized sunglasses despite the mild weather, and one polished shoe tapped rapidly against the brick path. She stood the moment she saw me. "Thank you for coming," she said, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. I remained standing. "You asked to speak alone." She glanced around to make sure no one lingered nearby. "Things got out of hand yesterday." They did. We both said things we shouldn't have. A breeze lifted a strand of her hair across her face. She brushed it aside with quick, impatient fingers. Wade barely slept. "He feels terrible." I watched a pair of sparrows hop through the fallen leaves between us, pecking at acorns before disappearing into the shrubs. "Does he?" She nodded immediately. "He loves you." Love does not arrive with a realtor. The fountain continued. Its quiet rhythm. Romy folded her arms. "You're punishing him because you're grieving. I changed the locks because you tried to sell my house." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine. Maybe I pushed too hard. But we were thinking about our future. By removing mine." She inhaled slowly, then reached into her purse and produced a folded sheet of paper. "Let's stop fighting. We can make this simple." She handed it toward me. The paper was crisp beneath my fingertips. At the top, in bold print, were the words "Family Occupancy Agreement." "Sign this," she said. "It lets us move back in as tenants. We'll pay rent. Everyone wins." I scanned the first paragraph. The monthly rent listed was barely enough to cover the property taxes Noel and I had paid every year. Another clause granted them unrestricted access to every room in the house. I looked up without changing expression. "You brought a contract. I brought a compromise. You brought another way to control my home." Her voice sharpened. "You're looking for reasons to say no." I folded the agreement along its original crease and placed it back into her hand. "No." I found one. The paper fluttered in the breeze before she caught it. "You're making Wade choose between you and me." He already chose. The sunglasses finally came off. Her eyes flashed with frustration. "Do you know what people are saying? They think we were thrown out." "Were you?" She stared at me without answering. Behind us, the fountain splashed steadily, and sunlight glimmered across its rippling surface. I reached into my handbag and removed the ring of house keys Wade had surrendered the night before. The brass reflected a bright line of afternoon light. I held them out. Romy looked at them hopefully. Instead of placing them into her hand, I dropped them into the small donation box mounted beside the garden's visitor center, where lost keys were collected for recycling. The keys struck the metal bottom with a clear, final clink. "Those locks no longer exist," I said quietly. "Neither does the arrangement you believed you still had." She took one slow step backward. For the first time since Noel's funeral, she seemed to realize there was no argument left that could return things to the way they had been. "Then this is really over?" she asked. I looked toward the maple trees where red leaves drifted gently across the path before answering. "Living under my roof is over. Whether this family survives depends on what happens next." I turned and walked toward the parking lot. Gravel crunched beneath my shoes, and the cool wind carried the smell of fresh-cut grass across the open lawn. Before I reached my car, my phone vibrated again. This time it was Wade. Only 6 words appeared across the screen. "Mom, please let me explain everything." I unlocked the driver's door, rested one hand on the cool metal roof, and looked back once toward the gazebo where Romy still stood alone holding the unsigned agreement. Then I typed a single reply before starting the engine. "Tomorrow, noon." Come without Romy. Edit at 11:58 the next morning, Wade's car rolled into the driveway beneath a pale November sun. The tires whispered over damp leaves, and the engine idled for several seconds before shutting off. I watched from the dining room window while steam rose from the coffee I had poured into Noelle's old brown mug. The house smelled of cinnamon toast and fresh polish, and the new deadbolt caught the light whenever the bare maple branches moved outside. Wade came alone. He stood on the porch in a charcoal jacket with his hands buried in the pockets, staring at the unfamiliar lock until I opened the door. Cold air brushed past him, carrying the scent of wet soil and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. You said noon, I told him. It's noon. He nodded and stepped inside only after I moved aside. His shoes left 2 dark marks on the entry rug. I did not reach for a towel. I led him to the dining room, where Noelle's letter rested beside the certified deed and Wade's note from the previous morning. Sunlight fell across the table in narrow gold strips, revealing every crease in the paper. Wade remained standing. Romy thinks I'm meeting a leasing agent, he said. Then this is the first honest choice you've made in a while. His fingers tightened around the back of a chair before he sat. The wood gave a faint creak beneath his weight. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking clock and the soft hiss of the radiator warming the room. He looked at the deed but did not touch it. Dad told me the house would be mine someday. Someday is not the same as now. I know. His voice scraped on the words. He pulled a folded envelope from inside his jacket and placed it on the table. I need to tell you what happened. I kept both hands around the mug. Its ceramic surface was warm against my palms. Tell me why you smiled when she told me to leave. He lowered his eyes. Outside, a truck rumbled past, making the window panes tremble. Because I had already agreed with her. The admission settled between us more heavily than any excuse could have. Wade continued before I spoke. He said Romy had convinced him the house was the only practical solution after Noelle died. Their rental plan had failed. They had debts from renovating their own home, and she kept repeating that I would be safer in a senior community. Each time he hesitated, she reminded him that Noelle had once said he wanted the property to remain in the family. Wade had turned that sentence into permission. She made it sound reasonable, he said. And I wanted it to be reasonable because then I didn't have to admit what I was doing. I set the mug down. Coffee rippled against the rim. She spoke the words, Wade. You nodded. His face tightened. I did. She gave me 14 days. I let her. She called this house yours. I didn't correct her. The radiator clicked off, and the room cooled around us. Wade reached for the envelope he had brought, opened it, and slid out several pages. These cancel the lease arrangement on our house. We're moving back there. I also withdrew every request connected to this property. No realtor, no loan application, nothing. He pushed the papers toward me. This was not another promise spoken over dinner. His signature appeared at the bottom of every page in dark blue ink. I read each document slowly, feeling the smooth paper beneath my fingertips and hearing his uneven breathing across the table. Then I placed them beside the deed. Why now? He looked toward Noelle's empty chair. Dust floated through the sunlight above its worn leather seat. Because yesterday Romy told me we should challenge the deed and claim you weren't capable of managing the property. His jaw moved once before he continued. I told her no. She said I had to choose between our marriage and you. I waited. What did you choose? I chose to stop helping her take what wasn't ours. He removed his wedding ring and set it on the table, not dramatically, but with the careful motion of a man placing down something that had become too heavy. The metal made a small, clean sound against the wood. I'm staying at a hotel until we decide what happens next. I'm not asking to come back here. I opened Noelle's letter and turned it toward him. His father's handwriting crossed the page in steady black lines. Wade read the sentence about who belonged in the home. His shoulders folded, and he covered his mouth with one hand. I did not move to comfort him. Some pain had to remain where it landed long enough to teach its lesson. After several minutes, he looked up. Can you ever forgive me? Sunlight had shifted away from his face, leaving him in the cooler shadow near the window. Forgiveness is not the same as returning to what we were, I said. You will not have a key. You will not manage my money. You will not speak for me. And you will never again remain silent while someone humiliates me. He nodded once. I understand. No. You will prove that you understand. I gave him the unsigned occupancy agreement Romy had brought to the garden. Return this to her. Tell her the house is mine, the decision is mine, and there will be no second attempt. He tore the paper cleanly down the center, then again, the crisp ripping sound filling the room. He carried the pieces to the kitchen trash and dropped them beneath the cold coffee grounds. That action changed nothing behind us, but it changed what could happen next. At the front door, Wade paused beneath the brass light fixture Noel had installed himself. "May I call you next Sunday?" he asked. "You may call. And if you don't answer, you try again the following Sunday." He accepted that without bargaining. When the door closed behind him, the latch settled with a firm click, but the house no longer sounded empty. I returned to the dining room, placed Noel's letter inside the leather case, and moved his chair back to its proper place at the table. Romy had tried to remove me from my own life, and Wade had helped her, but in the end, the person who packed her bags and never came back was not me. De la motio kong 102 trong mot koi duwe not. Edit: a grieving widow is told to pack her bags and leave the home she shared with her late husband, while her own son stands silently beside his wife. But what begins as heartbreaking family betrayal soon becomes a powerful story of dignity, truth, and quiet justice. As hidden legal documents, painful choices, and long-overdue boundaries reshape their lives, a mother refuses to surrender the home built with decades of love. This emotional family drama explores inheritance, loyalty, manipulation, motherhood, and redemption, delivering a deeply satisfying ending where courage, self-respect, and unwavering resolve prove stronger than greed.